Oh boy.
This $1.9 trillion monstrosity that was just unleashed by the federal government is a radical shift in the nature of the relationship between the government and the individual. It involves a massive bailout to all of the states and localities that have done a horrible job running their own business. It has also created essentially a brand new welfare program. Okay, the welfare program rolls back welfare reform. Welfare reform in the 1990s was designed to get people off the welfare rolls and encourage people to work. And there was a lot of talk at the time, well, this is going to create child poverty. It didn't create child poverty. All it did was push people back to work. Well, the new plan from Joe Biden, this stimulus bill, essentially creates a baseline universal basic income for people with kids. Now, it is not connected to work. It is not connected to unemployment. It is not connected to anything. It's a new entitlement, okay? And the way that you can tell it's a new entitlement is the way the media are talking about it. It's supposed to sunset next year, but Republicans are then going to be in the position of saying, okay, it needs to go away. And Democrats know this, which is why they passed it in the first place. The New York Times calls it a policy revolution in aid for children. According to Jason...
So to be clear, the UBI that he's talking about is $3,600 for one child, 5 or below. So that comes out to, what, $300 a month in UBI for one child? Unless we're going to say that all tax credits or all refundable tax credits are UBI, that's kind of silly to make that claim. Is it supposed to be bad because he says the word UBI? Or I guess he's trying to say that it disincentivizes work maybe. But I mean, like, unemployment can only run for so long. You can't be on unemployment forever. And then tax credits for children have like always existed. We've always had tax credits. They weren't refundable, but...
If you didn't pay taxes, you didn't get the child tax credit. Well, now, it doesn't matter whether you pay taxes. You still get what we're going to lie about and call a tax credit. It's not a tax credit. You're not paying taxes. It's just a redistribution check. The plan establishes the benefit for a single year, but if it becomes permanent, says the New York Times, as Democrats intend, it will greatly enlarge the safety net for the poor and the middle class at a time when the volatile modern economy often leaves families moving between those groups. More than 93% of children, 69 million, would receive benefits under the plan at a one-year cost of more than $100 billion. It raises the maximum benefit most families will receive by up to 80% per child, extends it to millions of families whose earnings are currently too low to qualify under existing law, because again, it was a child tax credit. So they're just backdooring, right? They're saying this is not it's not a child tax credit anymore. Now it is a check. Now, one of the things that the government did in the 1960s.
I mean, it's still like, people have such bad ways of looking at money, especially poor people, and then especially politicians, I guess. People have such a bad way of looking at like, well, that's not a tax credit. That's just a check to you. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, it's all income and liability. At the end of the day, really, you're either earning money or you're paying money, or you earn money and you owe money. And like, whether somebody gives you a check or whether somebody knocks off part of your tax bill, or like, at the end of the day, it's all really the same shit. But like, man, dude, the way that you phrase it will fucking trigger the fuck out of some people, dude. Like, if I give you like an extra bill for $5 versus I just like increase by 5% like some $100 bill, like people look at it so fucking differently. Yeah, holy shit. I think that I'm a little bit less comfortable talking about this. I think that one of the reasons why economies prefer interest, or why they try to avoid like deflationary spirals during economic downturns, is because if you have a group of people working a job under a firm, people would rather you fire one employee and keep 10 than make it so that all 11 employees take a pay cut. Because people do not want to see the amount of money they earn go down. But if the economy inflates enough because of monetary policy or whatever, and there's enough inflation that your wages effectively fall, but you don't see an actual cut in pay, people are okay with that. Like the way that people like look at money is like very stupid, just in terms of like how people like view money.
Is they dramatically increase the single motherhood rate in both the black and the white communities. In 1960, the black single motherhood rate was 20%. Today, it's in excess of 70%. In the white community,
I don't think that's the point he's making. He's saying that they're trying to hide giving checks to people under the term tax credit, seemingly to make it pass more easily. In the end, he's just against giving them a check straight up. Yeah, sure. But then, like, I feel like you should just argue against that. Like, if you want to argue against that, just say, like, listen, I don't think there should be any tax credits ever for people with children. We shouldn't incentivize poor people to make children. Because that sounds like the argument that he really wants to make. But if you want to make that argument, then make that argument. Let's deal with that. Do you think that we should get rid of all forms of like child tax credits or child tax deductions or whatever, or dependent deductions? Should head of household filing be gone? Like, if you want to get rid of those tax classifications, then fine, yeah, do that. But why, but don't hide it with this like bullshit language. Like, oh, well, they're lying about expanding like a tax credit to give people checks. And it's like, oh, well, I mean, like, that's more or less how tax credits are anyways. The government gave you a check. You just don't really see it. It's at the end of the year, you have a lower liability or you get a tax refund, right? Destiny, it's cool to hear you say that because my Econ 101 teacher told us basically that word for word. Well, cool. We strive to do Econ 101 here, so.
Community, the white single motherhood rate was somewhere on the order of 5%. Today, it's in excess of 40%. That is specifically because of welfare policies that incentivize people to have kids.
Citation needed. Okay, hardcore citation needed, okay? You cannot just say that, like, well, look, the reason why there's so many single families today is because of tax policy, all right?
To not have a husband in the home. Because if the income got too high, you didn't get the credit from the welfare program. This is not quite that, but the similarities are pretty stunning. While the current program distributes money annually as a tax reduction to families with income tax liability or a check to those too poor to owe income taxes, the new program would send both groups monthly checks to provide a more stable cash flow. By the standards of previous aid debates, opposition has been surprisingly muted. The bill hasn't won any Republican votes, but critics have focused on other elements of the rescue package. Some conservatives call the child benefit welfare and warn that it's going to bust budgets and weaken incentives to work or to marry, which of course is correct. When the government becomes a parent and essentially is footing all your bills, then your incentive to actually create an upwardly mobile family unit is greatly lessened. You see less income mobility, less family formation, less productive trajectory for children in a situation in which the government plays father.
There's probably a lot of reasons why people are having less and less children, or why people prefer to stay in single households, or why people aren't getting married. Like, there's probably reasons for this. I don't think it's all related to tax policy and the government. Like, I find that very, very, very hard to believe.
It's a problem. Okay, but Democrats are pushing that forward. So it's a reversion back to 1960 standards of how the war on poverty was to be fought. By the way, we have now spent $22 trillion in the war on poverty over the course of the war on poverty, and we have not budged the percentage of people who are living below the poverty line in the United States pretty much at all. The economic shock and racial protests of the past year brought new momentum to the plan, says the New York Times, whose reach, while broad, would especially help Black and Latino families who are crucial to the Democrats' coalition. Okay, so in other words, it's a specialized giveaway to a particular voting bloc that Biden wants to help out. Mr. Biden's embrace of the subsidies is a leftward shift.
Okay, people always say this like it's bad, but like, that's kind of what you're supposed to do. Like, you are supposed to appease your voting bloc. Like, that's kind of the point of being a fucking elected politician. That's what you do in a democracy, right? Like, when Trump fucking holds the Bible upside down and pretends like he's ever opened it in his entire fucking life, like, of course it's to appease your voting bloc. Like, well, yeah. Like, this, like, it's funny because when you reframe their arguments, it's so stupid. Like, this fucking guy is basically approving a bunch of policy to win support and the popularity over people that vote for him. Like, well, yeah, of course. Like, what the fuck do you think the Trump tax cuts were, you fucking moron? Like, that's the whole point. That's the whole fucking point of government policies, to do things that the people that voted for you like you to do. Like, no fucking shit. Like, what the fuck? Does appeasing a voting bloc make it good? That's the point of an elected politician, is to appease your voters. We live in a democracy. Yeah, of course, that's what you're supposed to do.
To help out. Mr. Biden's embrace of the subsidies is a leftward shift for a Democratic Party that made deep cuts in cash aid in the 90s under the theme of ending welfare. As a senator, Biden...
Is this 8 minute... Is this 8... Why couldn't he have just... Okay, I think it would have been way more based if Ben Shapiro got some fucking crazy music in the background, dressed up in some crazy black cloak, and just fucking screamed into the camera for 8 minutes, like, welfare queen, welfare queen, welfare queen. Like, why not just do that for 8.5? Why, like, do this? Like, make a ContraPoints video out of it, okay? Call Abigail. Make it entertaining to watch instead of this weird Coach Red Pill camera angles with the zooming camera around the office. I don't know why we're doing this. Like, we're point of view, you snuck a drone into, like, Angry Shapiro's office to listen to him rant about welfare queen. Like, why not just do that for 8 minutes?
As a senator, Biden supported the 1996 welfare restrictions. As recently as August, his campaign was non-committal about the child benefit. Now, the president promotes projections that the monthly checks, up to $300 for young children and $250 for those over 5, would cut poverty by 45% for children and by more than 50% among Black families. Okay, so here's the question. Is that true? Because we've had these sorts of benefits before. It has not cut poverty. It turns out that you can sign checks to these families, and that doesn't mean that poverty is going to be cut in the end. Because in order to get out of poverty, you actually have to make a...
I wish I knew more. I wish I knew more about this in terms of like how effective the war on poverty has been. Like, I know we haven't made much progress maybe recently, but I mean, like, it seems like it's helped a little bit, no? But I would have to read more than just like a single chart. I know there are people linking me stuff in chat, but I don't feel like going off into like how beneficial have we been in terms of war on poverty, but
series of decisions that get you out of poverty over time. It is not merely a question of signing people checks. If it were merely a question of signing people checks, again, $22 trillion spent over the last 60 years in the United States would have been a pretty good way to alleviate poverty. It has not alleviated poverty in the United States. In fact, the black middle class was growing faster in the 1950s than it has after.
This is also really boring too, because Shapiro was a smart guy. I'm pretty sure he is. Maybe he's not. I'm not sure. Like, I don't think anybody thinks that just giving people money is the way to fix anything, right? But it's also like, it's probably also not good to just like tell people to get jobs either, right? Like, the way that you fix poverty is probably by improving like institutions in the United States and then getting people more engaged with those institutions. So having like a healthier labor market, having a better system of education, having more reproductive control and family planning access. Like, these are probably the things that lead to a more productive society. And I think that like certain forms of cash infusions can work to build that. So for instance, if we look at the last coronavirus bill, all of the funding for education or whatever, like especially K through 12 and college stuff, things like that probably go towards building a better society. Right? That's probably a direct example of it.
After that, thanks largely to the intervention of the federal government in welfare programs like this. But again, this is the kind of policy that Joe Biden is now pushing, or at least his administration is, while he's asleep on the couch or at the Denny's for the early bird dinner. So that is a major policy shift for Biden. And of course, he's going to be championing that tonight. He's going to deliver a primetime address on Thursday.
Is this literally the only thing we're going over in the stimulus bill? You just don't like the expansion of the child tax credit? Like,
actually, marking the first anniversary of the virus restrictions. And he's going to champion his own role in overcoming the virus. Now, here's the thing. His own role in overcoming the virus has been pretty limited. And you want an indicator of just what Joe Biden has done on a personal level? There were supposed to be 100 mass vaccination sites set up by the federal government by the end of February. By the end of February, there were 7. The systems were in place. It is governors who have been doing the heavy lifting here. All the federal government could do was help actually obtain the vaccines and the dosages. Any federal government worth its salt would have done all of that. But
the only thing the federal government did was it got the vaccines and distributed them. But it's been the governors that have been setting up the vaccination sites. I feel like that's probably a pretty big part of it. Like, all you did was get the vaccines. Like, okay.
You're going to see a victory lap here by Joe Biden. And again, this is a heady time because we're spending all the money. And that's fine. We're going to spend all the money and it's going to all be great because we're going to spend all the money. We did this in the 60s.
I also like this line. Hold on.
Any federal government worth its salt, women could do. The systems were in place. It is governors who have been doing the heavy lifting here. All the federal government could do was help actually obtain the vaccines and the dosages. Any federal government worth its salt would have done all of that. But
I mean, it seems like people have had a lot of trouble getting the vaccine. I don't know about that one, Benny boy. I mean, like, you can say that. Well, any government would have gotten all the fucking vaccines. I don't know, man. It seems like there's a lot of our brothers, a lot of our pure white angels over in Europe seem to have a lot of trouble with that. I'm not sure.
You're going to see a victory lap here by Joe Biden. And again, this is a heady time because we're spending all the money. And that's fine. We're going to spend all the money and it's going to be all be great because we're going to spend all the money. We did this in the 60s. Okay, in the 1960s, we blew out the spending. If you look at the growth rates in the early 60s and GDP in the American economy, very, very high. That was because the rest of the world had been devastated by World War II. They were still trying to move beyond their own socialistic policies. Many of them had to curb those policies. In the 1960s, the United States decided it was going to become a social democratic country. It was going to become much more European in its view of the welfare state. We blew out the domestic spending. We actually blew out military spending as well for a period there. And we ended up with the stagnation of the 1970s, an awful time for economics, so bad that there was a backlash in the form of the Reagan Revolution in the 1980s. So that is what we are about to relive. We're basically just reliving the mid-1960s to late 1970s. And this began over the course of the past couple of years with the pandemic. It began with the...
Why do Americans feel like it is so unattainable for us to just have a few of the worker-related policies that exist in Europe? Why is it that somebody working at McDonald's in France can get 5 or 6 weeks of paid vacation? Or why is it that somebody working at Max in Sweden is able to get like a fucking year maternity leave? Or what? Like, we really can't do any of this in the US? Why is it that anybody in Germany can get sick and go to the hospital and have to pay a small fee for it, and in the U.S. you're like bankrupt? Like, we can't do any of this. We really can't. It's just out of reach for America. We're just so special. We're just such a special people. We just can't do any of this. Like,
the racial protests and riots in America's major cities, it feels very much like about 1968 right now. It feels a lot like that in terms of where we are and what the next decade is going to look like. And of course, Joe Biden is in on it. I mean, he's loving this stuff. Facts don't care about your feelings. And it's a fact that the Ben Shapiro show is...
All right, well, we've got Ben hates welfare queens. Man, I guess the nice thing about big legislation is there's something in it for everybody to just fucking hate against. All right, who do we have next? Who else are we suffering through? Oh, God.
There's a lot of good stuff in this bill.
Good job. All right. Is the implication that there's that Trump would have passed a more progressive form of relief? Is that the implication? Where do we get off on the Biden train, baby? Good luck. Why? Here's something I don't understand about leftists. Remember to hit that like and subscribe, and don't forget the notification bell so that my videos show up right in your feed.
Right. You found the one honest leftist in America. Congratulations. There's only one of them, and he's walking around in Nebraska somewhere.
And I was born in Omaha, the great state of Nebraska.